50 minutes into Canada's World Cup clash with Qatar in Vancouver, one member of the Canadian coaching staff looked toward the referee and delivered 5 words that captured the horror of the moment better than any replay ever could. "His leg is hanging off." That wasn't media exaggeration. It wasn't an emotional overreaction from someone caught up in the chaos of a major tournament match. Those were the words of an experienced national team staff member, spoken in real time after witnessing what had happened to Ismail Kona's left leg. Canada head coach Jesse Marsh later described the moment in even more chilling detail. "You could hear the bones break," he said, "right in front of our bench. We all heard it." Canada would eventually cruise to a 6-0 victory. Jonathan David completed a hat trick. Schaffelberg opened the scoring. Nathan Saliba added a brilliant free kick. Under ordinary circumstances, this would have been remembered as a dominant performance. One of those nights that signals a team's arrival as a serious contender. It was Canada on the verge of reaching the knockout rounds of a World Cup hosted on home soil, in front of a packed crowd at BC Place. But when people woke up the next morning, almost nobody was discussing the score. They were talking about Kona. They were talking about the tackle that left him injured. They were talking about the red cards, the confrontations, the emotional scenes that unfolded on the pitch, and the kind of raw intensity that World Cup matches rarely produce outside the biggest finals. And they were talking about what happened 14 minutes later, when one of Kono's teammates sprinted to the touchline, picked up his jersey, and raised it high above his head, while thousands of fans stood and applauded. To understand why this match became so much bigger than football, we need to go through everything that happened. Because this story isn't really about tactics or formations. It's about one player, one moment, and the reaction of everyone around him. But before we get to the injury itself, it's important to understand exactly who Ismail Kona is and why this incident hit Canadian football with such force. Kona is only 23 years old. He emerged through CF Montreal's development system, the same organization that has helped produce several of Canada's most influential young players in recent years. The club's president, Gabriel Gervais, has previously spoken about how quickly Kono progressed through the ranks. It wasn't only his talent that impressed people. The talent was obvious from the beginning. What surprised them was how rapidly he transformed that potential into genuine first-team quality. As his reputation grew, interest began arriving from overseas. English clubs monitored his development closely, including Sheffield United, where a move came close to happening before ultimately collapsing. Rather than forcing a transfer, Kono chose patience. He remained in Montreal and continued his development there. Since then, his career has taken him through several major European clubs, including Watford, Marseille, and Rennes. The journey, according to both Kona himself and people around the Canadian national team setup, has not always been smooth. There were flashes of brilliance, moments that showed exactly why scouts rated him so highly. But there wasn't always the consistency required to fully establish himself at the highest international level. Then came this season with Sassuolo in Italy's Serie A. Something changed. Something finally clicked. Earlier in the year, he scored a delicate chipped goal against AC Milan, created another goal shortly afterward, and began putting together what many around the Canadian program describe as the most consistent stretch of football he has played in his career. And all of it was happening just as the World Cup arrived. There's another layer to this story as well. A history between Kona and Jesse Marsh that reveals the strength of the relationship interrupted by this injury. Back in September, during a friendly against Romania, Kona was substituted while Canada held the lead. He did not hide his frustration. He stormed toward the bench, visibly upset, then turned back toward Marsh for another exchange before being restrained by a reserve goalkeeper. At the time, it looked like the type of incident that could create long-term tension between a passionate young player and his manager. But that never happened. Both men later explained that the disagreement was quickly resolved. Kona spoke openly about how much representing Canada meant to him, how much he cared about the national team, how much wearing that jersey mattered. That emotional connection is important, because when a player has already shown the world exactly how deeply he cares about the badge, moments like the one that unfolded in Vancouver hit differently, not just for supporters, but for every person inside the dressing room. Now to the match itself. Before the 50th minute, Canada were already in complete control. They led 3-0 at halftime. Jonathan David had scored twice. Schaffelberg had added another. Qatar were also down to 10 men after Homam Al-Amin received a red card for a last-man challenge on Tejon Buchanan. Everything was unfolding exactly as expected. A comfortable Canadian victory appeared inevitable. Then came the challenge. Qatar's Ahmed Medbo lunged in from behind on Kona. The midfielder had already released the ball to a teammate. The tackle arrived late. Far too late. Kona had no chance to prepare for the contact or protect himself from the impact. The reactions from everyone nearby immediately revealed how serious the situation was, even before replays appeared on television. Medbo instantly grabbed his head with both hands. It was the universal reaction of a player who realizes the moment contact is made that something has gone terribly wrong. Players began urgently signaling toward the sidelines for medical assistance. Canadian teammates rushed to Kona's side. Medical personnel sprinted onto the field. Team doctors quickly applied an air cast to stabilize the injured leg, a standard emergency procedure used when a serious fracture is suspected. As Kona remained on the turf receiving treatment, emotions around him exploded. Players from both teams began confronting one another. The usual professionalism that accompanies injury stoppages disappeared. Anger and emotion took over. According to multiple reports, a brawl broke out involving players and staff members as tensions escalated around the stretcher incident. Medbo was shown a straight red card for serious foul play. Qatar, already reduced to 10 men earlier in the match, were now down to 9. Soon afterward, reports confirmed that Kono had suffered a suspected fracture of both the tibia and fibula, the two major bones in the lower leg. He was rushed to hospital where emergency surgery would be required to stabilize the injury. Several Canadian players appeared visibly shaken while medical staff worked around him. One of Kono's midfield partners, Steven Eustachio, later spoke about the impact of losing him. "We're going to miss him," he said. "He has that X factor our team really needs." Eventually, after being stabilized, Kono was placed on a stretcher and wheeled toward the tunnel. As he was taken away from BC Place, the entire stadium rose to its feet. Thousands of supporters delivered a standing ovation for a player heading directly to the hospital in the middle of a World Cup match. Many fans began chanting his name. From the stretcher, Kono responded with a thumbs up. He waved toward the crowd before disappearing into the tunnel. After the match, Marsh revealed that he still had not spoken directly with his player because Kono remained at the hospital with his mother and family. The Canadian coach said his first priority after media duties would be visiting him personally. Surgery was inevitable. At that stage, however, the exact details of the procedure and the recovery timetable remained unknown. 14 minutes after Kono left the field, Nathan Saliba stepped up to take a free kick. His strike clipped the inside of the post before crossing the line off the goalkeeper's arm. As he celebrated, Saliba formed the number 8 with his hands Kona's squad number. Then he ran to the touchline, picked up Kona's jersey, and raised it toward the crowd. Those inside the stadium later said the roar that followed was even louder than the celebration for the goal itself. Moments like that can't be rehearsed. Nobody prepares a tribute in the middle of a World Cup match. It happens when teammates genuinely care about the person who has just been carried off the field. It happens when they want him to know that he's not alone, no matter where he is. But this is where the story takes another turn. Because after the final whistle, with Canada having completed a dominant 6-0 victory, the focus shifted once again. A heated confrontation erupted between members of the Canadian and Qatari benches. Jesse Marsh and Qatar manager Yulan Lopide became involved in an intense exchange near the touchline, and within moments, the tension spread. Players, coaches, and staff from both sides were suddenly drawn into a wider confrontation that ensured the controversy surrounding this match was far from over. Neither coach seemed interested in revealing exactly what was said after the match. When Jesse Marsh was asked about the confrontation, his response was brief and unmistakable. "I'm not going to spend a single second talking about that." But while he avoided discussing the altercation itself, he spoke at length about something else: his confusion regarding Qatar's reaction to the red card incident. Marsh revealed that after being sent off, Ahmed Medbo actually entered Canada's dressing room and personally apologized to Ismail Kona. According to Marsh, Kona later informed his teammates that the apology had taken place. The Canadian manager also made it clear that he did not believe Medbo intended to cause such a devastating injury. Yet that individual act of accountability stood in sharp contrast to what Marsh felt he witnessed from the rest of the Qatari bench during the match. He openly questioned why so many members of Qatar's staff appeared to argue against the sending off, when, from his perspective, the challenge had clearly resulted in a player suffering a broken leg. And that contradiction sits at the center of this entire story. On one side, a player who immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and sought out his opponent to apologize face-to-face. On the other, a wider group still disputing the punishment, despite the consequences everyone had just witnessed. Two completely different reactions, one incident, one team, and all of it unfolding within the span of a single evening. Now, beyond the emotion, there is still a major football story here. Because Canada's tournament ambitions did not disappear with the injury. In fact, the victory moved them to the edge of something historic. The 6-0 result, powered by Jonathan David's hat-trick, left Canada in a commanding position in Group B heading into their final group stage match against Switzerland. For years, Canadian football has been building toward a moment like this. A home World Cup. A generation of talent reaching maturity. A national team finally capable of competing with confidence on the biggest stage in the sport. Alphonso Davies returned after spending 262 days sidelined with a serious ACL injury. Jonathan David arrived in arguably the best form of his career. Supporters across the country finally had the opportunity to watch their nation host football's greatest tournament. Everything seemed to be aligning at exactly the right time. And now, suddenly, one of the team's most influential midfielders is no longer part of that journey on the pitch. Throughout the season with Sassuolo, Kona had established himself as one of Canada's most important players heading into the World Cup. According to Marsh, he had also been outstanding during Canada's opening matches of the tournament. His ability to create opportunities, progress the ball through midfield, and bring energy to both sides of the game had made him a crucial part of the manager's plans. More importantly, he had become a player Marsh trusted completely. Losing someone like that is about much more than replacing a name on a team sheet. A broken leg requiring surgery changes the emotional landscape of a tournament. It affects preparation. It affects confidence. It affects the atmosphere inside a dressing room. And while those impacts never appear on the scoreboard, they often influence everything that comes afterward. Not just during the remainder of the group stage, but potentially throughout an entire World Cup campaign. Marsh admitted his players were deeply affected by what happened. He even compared the situation to the serious injury suffered by fellow Canadian international Tajon Buchanan during training back in 2024. The word he used repeatedly was shaken, and that word tells its own story. This wasn't simply a tactical problem. It wasn't just the loss of a midfielder. It was a group of teammates watching a friend carried away on a stretcher during what should have been one of the most memorable nights of his life. A World Cup match. At home. In front of thousands of Canadian supporters, with family members in attendance expecting to celebrate, only to find themselves heading toward a hospital instead. That reality is difficult to process in any situation. Yet according to Marsh, the players found a way to regroup. They refocused. They completed the job, because they believed that was exactly what Kono would have wanted them to do. There are a lot of thoughts going through our minds right now, Marsh said. We're all thinking about him, but we're also proud of who we are. That phrase, proud of who we are, may ultimately define this Canadian team more than any statistic from the match itself, because it speaks to identity, to resilience, to a group that refuses to allow adversity to determine how its story ends. And perhaps that's the broader lesson hidden inside moments like this. World Cup football creates unforgettable scenes, not only because of the results, but because of the emotional investment behind them. Every player arrives carrying years of sacrifice. Every teammate shares experiences that most fans never see. Every squad builds bonds through victories, disappointments, training camps, and countless hours together away from the spotlight. Sometimes those relationships remain invisible. Then a moment like this happens. A player suffers a devastating injury. A stadium rises to applaud him. A teammate scores and immediately dedicates the goal to him. And suddenly, those connections become visible for everyone watching. The standing ovation for Kona served as a reminder that behind every statistic, every tactical discussion, and every final score, football remains a deeply human sport. It is played by people who care. people who sacrifice, people who form genuine connections with one another. At the same time, the heated exchanges between Marsh, Lope, and both benches highlighted the other side of that emotional reality. When so much is at stake, emotions do not always stay under control. Frustration can spill over. Anger can take over, and even experienced professionals can find themselves caught in moments they would rather not revisit later. Neither manager appeared eager to relive the confrontation after the final whistle. Perhaps that says enough on its own. As for what comes next, nobody can yet say with certainty. Recovery from fractures involving both the tibia and fibula typically requires months of rehabilitation, especially when surgery is involved. That reality almost certainly ends Kono's World Cup before the knockout rounds have even begun. It is a cruel outcome for a player who, by both his own assessment and that of those around him, had finally reached the most complete and consistent level of his career at precisely the right moment. For Canada, however, the tournament continues, and they move forward with a squad that has demonstrated not only exceptional quality on the field, but remarkable unity away from it. Their final group stage match against Switzerland now carries enormous significance. A positive result could secure a place in the knockout rounds and mark one of the most important achievements in modern Canadian football history. But regardless of what happens next, this match has already left a lasting impression. The injury, the apology, the standing ovation, the tribute goal, the confrontation, the emotion, all of it combined into a night that few people who witnessed it are likely to forget. So what do you think? How do you view Medbo's decision to personally apologize compared with the reaction shown by the rest of Qatar's bench during the match? And where does Nathan Saliba's tribute rank among the most memorable moments of this World Cup? Will people remember that gesture long after they've forgotten the final score? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Does an experience like this change the way you watch Canada for the remainder of the tournament, knowing everything this team is carrying with it into every match that follows? Share your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. It genuinely helps more than most people realize. And subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football stories that go beyond the scoreboard. From every match to every major talking point, we'll be covering the stories that shaped this World Cup all the way to the final. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Because football at this level is never just about results. Sometimes it reminds us exactly how much these players mean to one another when everything is on the line.